This is my conversation with Arnold Kling, an American economist, author, and one of the internet's earliest and most influential economics blogger. After earning a PhD in economics from MIT, he spent years working as an economist at the Federal Reserve from 1980 to 1986, and as a senior economist at Freddie Mac from 1986 to 1994. He then pivoted to the tech world, founding and later selling the company HomeFair.com. Since 2000, Kling has been a prolific writer and blogger, co founding EconLog with Brian Kaplan and David R. Henderson, and later launching his own site, AskBlog. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute and affiliated with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. He is also the author of several books exploring economics and political thought, including Specialization and Trade, Unchecked and Unbalanced, and his best known work, The Three Languages of Politics, which offers a framework of understanding how liberals, conservatives, and libertarians talk past each other. Hi, Arnold. How are you?
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to just start with, your main focus of interest right now. You've said AI could dramatically improve education and healthcare if you use it wisely. What does wisely mean to you?
Well, in education, it would mean people use it to learn rather than to avoid learning.
Hmm.
And that's, of course, the big challenge that's got, a lot of controversy in higher education, especially right now.
In an ideal scenario, what would it look like as in incorporating AI into the workspace, higher education? Like you've also mentioned healthcare in the past as well. So what does that ideal scenario look like if you were to decide?
Okay, well, one picture of the ideal that a lot of tech people are aware of in education goes back to a Neil Stevenson novel called The Diamond Age. And the subtitle is A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer. And there, this was, I think he wrote it in about 1994, but he has a little girl discover what looks like an iPad today, I guess, and it is able to teach her anything with sort of videos and other tools. And I think that's kind of, in some sense, the ideal is uh, that anyone can learn anything, uh, and they get the right. It's taught at the right level. It's personalized, and it sort of solves the education problem. The reason I mentioned education and healthcare as being important for AI to tackle is that those have grown uh, to sort of be one of the largest sectors of the economy. So if you went back, about 100 years, you would have lots of people working in agriculture. You would have lots of people working on assembly lines in manufacturing. Now, I think only about about 5% of Americans are on assembly lines in manufacturing. Manufacturing slightly larger because you've got supervisors and accountants and so on. But the actual, putting stuff together work is really only about 5% of the workforce. Agriculture is about 2%. Uh, Healthcare and education together are probably closer to 20%. So it's just a much bigger share of the economy, especially for work. The uh, sort of capital produces a much smaller share of the output of healthcare and education. So if the bottom line is if AI is going to really make a difference in the overall economy, it has to do something dramatic in healthcare and education. And so far, technology has not moved the needle very much on education. And a lot of people in education are looking at that and saying, well, AI is not going to be any different.
How would you make your argument for people who would say that AI is not as in vogue as it was
like, when you might have said that AI is going to change the way healthcare is going to be, innovating, or research is being done, or in education. But on the other hand, I would say that, like, AI is getting more and more AI hallucinations. It's not being so useful. There's a lot of AI slop on the internet, the AI bubble, so to speak, with the data centers. Feasibility studies don't seem to help. So how do you see that future incorporating with the AI
Well, I think
space?
there's a scenario in which it fails, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that's a possibility. I think you have to be very careful about making any kind of judgment one way or the other
Of course.
uh, based on what you see now or what you've seen before.
Hmm.
If somebody, saw the first version of Chat GPT and then made up their mind about what AI is going to be like based on that, I think they're lost in two dimensions. They're lost in uh, sort of the time dimension, and also uh, the paid for versions are now quite a bit ahead of the free versions. So if you use the free version from a couple of years ago, you don't have a good impression of it. I will say that I don't feel confident that I know how AI works, that is what its limitations are and what its capabilities are and what its the limits on its future capabilities are. I'm not sure anyone knows that. I was giving a talk at the University of Austin where I was brought in as a visiting professor. And I started the talk by writing in big letters on the blackboard, I don't know,
Hmm.
because it's hard to know. Um, what I see is something that's improving a lot at a very rapid rate, really at a rate that I personally can't keep up with it. I think even some of the most in tune people cannot keep up with it. Uh, so we don't know, in some sense, where the asymptote is, where it's going to stop improving. Um, One way to think of it is uh, let X be the percent of of uh, of a human of the human. Let's let me start that again.
No.
Um, let's say take something like self-driving cars.
Hmm.
What percentage of people are not as good drivers as a self-driving car today? Let's say it's just 20%. Let's say it's a self-driving car is only as good as the 20%, the 20th percentile of human drivers. Well, if it stays there and doesn't get much better, then self-driving cars won't have much of an impact. They'll have a very limited impact. If that gets up to 90 or 95%, humans are going to be having a hard time getting a driver's license, right?
Hmm.
If a self-driving car is better and safer than 90 to 95% of humans, then humans will have a hard time getting driver's licenses. So somewhere in between where they are now and where they could be, interesting things start to happen. So the view that AI won't have an impact on education or won't have an impact on healthcare, I think is a view that AI stays about where it is right now, and is a view that it doesn't improve. And so all of us are sort of in a position of having to guess how much improvement we're going to see. And the scenario that I'm focused on is where there's a lot of improvement, especially improvement in the applications, how it can be used. I think
Hmm.
the skill AI currently has is pretty amazing,
Hmm.
but the applications are kind of behind.
Hmm. I think a lot of it from a marketing perspective is also data gathering and how it's disseminated. Usually, the traditional pattern of like exposing ourselves to current events is either one, social media, because now that's very more common because it's like 24/7 news cycle versus traditional media where there was breaking news. And in that same way, in that vein, if you were to consider AI, it creates your own echo chamber of narratives. It reassures you of what you're saying and what you agree with. I understand the application from a perspective of like a mechanism that can be used in medicine for data gathering and also solution finding. But how do you sparse that with like general use, so to speak, and how it is affecting the way groups get polarized and how that is also changing the way narratives are formed and extreme thinking and value systems are being built based on like the feedback loop that AI is offering.
I haven't seen AI offering that kind of feedback loop the way, let's say, you can find it in social media. So I think it's sort of different, and uh, I wouldn't try to view AI with the same lens as social media. I think it's its own thing. Um, the I'm not the only person to suggest this. Some people have suggested that, in fact, AI could be uh, somewhat of a cure for the kind of post-truth world that social media puts us in, because an AI could just tell people what its best view of what the truth is. That's been my uh, experience talking with AI. One of the things, my latest little project is
Hmm.
a history of the early progressive period in the United States,
Hmm.
and it's certainly not giving me an echo of what I believed. In some
Hmm.
ways, I feel like I have to push back.
What I'm trying to say is usually it's not always the case. If you're looking for a fact-finding mission with reference links is great tool to do that. But there have been many cases of AI psychosis or people having long-term relationships with their AI partners. So there is almost a reinforcing narrative that can be built over time with AI chatbot, so to speak. So it's not as common, but it is a thing that happens. So there is like it's the machine learning itself and then how it is like built to adapt to the person that it's interacting with. You are a very fact person, you're also kind of person who just doesn't believe. You will do your research, so it helps for you to be like you're pushing back on your AI versus the other way around. But I would assume that the general public is not so you know
Yeah,
sharp in that manner. Yes.
yeah. I'm not. I mean, I read about people using AIs as companions. Um, I I personally haven't done that, so I have a hard
Hmm.
time knowing, what that whole scene is about.
Hmm. Fair enough. You have kind of also spoken about how you are against the idea of that AI is almost destructive to the creative space or creativity. Would you want to expand a little bit on more on that?
Yeah, on a lot of these issues, I think uh, it's important to have a model of how the human works that is sort of realistic. So I think people want to have this model of creativity. It's just something that comes out of nowhere. My model of human creativity is it's combining things. A term, this isn't my term, but other people have coined it, and I like it. The adjacent possible. So if two things, if some, if you're combining two things that are both out there and prevalent, that can look like creativity, and I think that's really what creativity is, rather than just completely out of the air. So the example I like to give, maybe this is just for old folks like me, is the Beatles sound. It was very creative and very original at the time, but you can think of it as combining the Everly Brothers, who were singing in certain kinds of harmonies, kind of the doo-wop harmony, and Chuck Berry with the heavy rock and roll beat. And in general, those things hadn't been combined in that way before. But if you had, if the Beatles had, if those same people had formed in the 1920s before Chuck Berry and before the Everly Brothers, they wouldn't have come up with something like that. And so if your model of creativity is taking the adjacent possible and putting it together, the AIs do that quite well. So I'm not convinced that they can't be creative.
What are your thoughts then on how the Western model with the Chinese model of AI is almost like an AI race, like we're racing to reach the moon, where one doesn't disclose, it's almost secretive, like we want to beat them at their game. And just before I think OpenAI was going to go public, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, DeepSeek came out. It was cheaper, faster, a lot more aggressive, and then that kind of affected the trust in or like the amount of financial input that was going to come into OpenAI. And it was such a shift. Instead of like these different like basic blocks of the East and the West working together to innovate together, and let's like like you said, healthcare and education, rather than like saying don't steal, check my answers, like this competitive race. Yes, it's good for innovation, but right now I feel like that would be a very the approach from a scientific and innovation point of view is like counterintuitive to politics. How do you like separate those two?
Yeah, well, it's mostly sort of outside of my area of expertise.
Fair.
I think that the question of how AI is going to affect warfare is, obviously a very important one, and that's probably the reason why there's sort of an AI race going on, or that there's a perception that if we fall behind in that race, somehow we'll be in an inferior position in terms of warfare. That's about all I can say about it because it's not my area of expertise.
I wouldn't say warfare, so to speak. I'm thinking in terms of innovation. There's a lot, because if the Chinese are able to, innovate and create DeepSeek at such a fast pace and a cheaper rate, the way that it is being like, it is competitive, which I totally understand. But do you see it moving faster in terms of like where it reaches its limits, or we find where we can, if we were to work together?
Well, I would say if you took the possibility of warfare off the table, or the use of AI in warfare off the table, then it would be very hard for people to sell the idea that we need to keep secrets or keep the Chinese down, or the Chinese need to keep us down. I think if it weren't for that, I imagine that we would be in a world where it's sort of, a more cooperative world, less competitive.
You've written critically about the gap between knowledge and power in institutions. In an era where visible experts, fail, how do you see that as like, as a democratized citizen, calibrate how much trust can be placed into like experts?
Well, that's an interesting question. So AI has the potential to actually enable experts to know something, know more than they do now, to have genuine expertise. It also has the potential to enable ordinary people to sort of see where experts are making mistakes. I think where we're starting from now is a position where the experts know way less than what they need to uh, exercise the power that they have. Uh, whether AI ends up closing that gap is an interesting question. I haven't really thought it through, but that's a good question.
But how do you see that in, like, again, we have to kind of give a reference data to what we have already seen. Sometimes it's not 100% accurate, but when the internet age was available, everyone could Google an answer, Wikipedia was available, and we assumed that, like, the level of everybody is going to go up. But in fact, people regressed where they used the internet for social media, TikTok videos, and we're not innovating as, as a whole. So don't you think that, like, we would assume that, like, I feel you, I understand you, that, you would hope for the best. But what are the big pit holes that we could end up falling under? Like,
Yeah.
what could happen?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, human nature is flawed. And I think, when people talk about AI doom,
Hmm.
I think I think before the AIs autonomously do awful things, bad humans will do awful things using AI. And so that's
Hmm.
something definitely to worry about. Uh, I can picture a future where there's so much dangerous information available through AIs that uh, governments do a lot of surveillance of individuals just to sort of uh, to try to keep bad people from doing bad things.
Hmm.
Um, that's one science fiction scenario. David Brin talked about it in the Transparent Society. They're almost 30 years ago, and it's a plausible scenario in which there's a lot more surveillance.
But that's not close to your value systems. I believe you're a libertarian, right? So how would you see
Well,
that?
well, Brin has a different take on libertarianism, which is uh, it's more about uh, sort of equality of power than absence of surveillance. So, uh, for example, his way of preventing someone from peeping into your bedroom window is that you will be able to see them peeping into your bedroom window. So if people know what kind of surveillance the government is doing, then that gives them the power to restrain the government. That's Brin's view. I think that's too optimistic about the power relationship. Uh, what I would think is we would need to set up a very powerful audit function around surveillance so that we know that the people doing surveillance aren't doing it in their own personal interest, and we know that they're uh, effectively trying to prevent terrorism or whatever it is they're trying to prevent. This is a very futuristic
Hmm.
science fiction story, but
Hmm.
I think we're probably getting closer to having to debate that issue every day as the AIs get better, as terrorists get better at using smaller and smaller weapons that are more and more powerful. I think we're headed to having that discussion. I think most
Do you
people
think
aren't
there's a
ready for it now.
Do you think crime increases with more access, or is just a lot more access to information as well? Because since I can remember, like, there have been all versions of scams. Like, someone give you a call versus someone doing it on the internet with a phishing email. There are several methods to this madness. So I feel like it's not innovation and AI that is, like, perpetrating crime intensity, but it's also like a psychological aspect of human beings as a community where it's like, oh, like, watch out. Like, there are some people who are careless and leave their keys on their car and everything is fine, versus the neighborhood. Okay, definitely context. So in that same way with AI, what are the context points? How does one know it's like, okay, these are the rules to the game? Because it's still such an evolving, adapting space that we're working with.
Yeah, I think it's in my mind, it goes back to kind of what you were saying of focusing on the people. So you have certain people who are too naive and they become vulnerable. And then you have certain people who are evil and they're going to do bad things. And then there's sort of people who are in between who are sort of know enough to fend off dangerous people and are not dangerous themselves. How to, you know, I just fear that going forward, the opportunities that evil people will have just get better and better, not necessarily because of AI, but because of other things, or things that AI enables, like drones and so on, or bioterrorism might be easier with AIs. So those are problems that we're going to have to really take a lot more seriously going forward, I think.
But isn't that just part of innovation? Like, what could be possible in the past versus what's possible now is just those are very different realities.
Sure, back when the only way people could fight was with, rocks and maybe some pointed objects, they couldn't do things that are as dangerous as what you can do today.
What do you say to, AI taking over so many jobs, and like especially right now it's been considered like the worst job market for young graduates to get out to, specifically because entry level jobs are taken away by AI. And that's kind of affecting the way the workforce is going to be able to like move forward and progress. From your perspective, how would you comment on that?
I think it's a legitimate worry. Let's say you're a sophomore in college and 40 years ago, you would say, well, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I could always go to law school and get get an entry level job at a law firm out of that. If you're a sophomore today, I wouldn't have that kind of confidence. And so I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm not sure that AI has actually enabled a whole lot of job cuts. There have been job cuts at tech firms, whether that's because they were bloated to begin with. Sometimes it's very hard to control a bureaucracy. If you're the CEO, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I need 5 more people to do this." You go, "Okay," and I need 5 more people to do that. And before you know it, you've got a very large group, and you have to make some cuts. So that could be just what's going on, or it could be that they are genuinely finding that they can increase the productivity of some staff and let the others go. I don't know. So I haven't seen proof that the job losses have started yet. I think it's very, very plausible that within 5 years, it'll be we'll have a very different job structure in which today's entry-level jobs don't exist, and the new entry-level jobs have something to do with making use of AI. It's very hard to
I think from my perspective, I would say that it is akin to the Industrial Revolution, where the job market morphed overnight almost, where people were working different kinds of jobs, versus now it's such a quick turnaround of AI taking over, like, entry level jobs or jobs which would require a lot more workforce. So the education system needs to catch up. Like when it was tech, there were loads of people going into the tech industry. So then there were loads of jobs and availabilities. Now it's like, okay, now what does it look like? I feel like we haven't caught up to what a future with AI and the education system works. And I think you've kind of alluded to how AI would innovate education. So like, how do you see that connecting with the future of workforce and AI, and how people would kind of follow certain career paths?
I think it's very difficult to predict. I mean, going back to the Industrial Revolution, I mean, relative to now, it wasn't overnight, right? It took, decades. And now I think time has speeded up a lot. The other thing is, like, if you'd ask somebody in 1780 to predict the job structure, they'd have gotten just about nothing right. So I think we're in kind of that situation. I think, for example, I've had, as I watched friends whose children, hit age 25, age 30, they had jobs that didn't exist in the 1990s. They were doing social media marketing. Well, no one would have said that's a job in the 90s. Um, and so, it'd take a tremendous skill to predict, I think, to be able to predict what types of jobs there will be. I think in the short run, I think a job that I think is needed for all colleges is what I call a keeper-upper. Somebody who keeps up with what's going on in AI and can tell professors and staff what the best uses of it are at any one given time, because that keeps changing over time. So that's obviously very transitional. At some point, I guess the AI will stop improving, stop expanding its capabilities, and we'll see what kind of jobs there are at that point. At least, I mean, that's one scenario. I mean, if it just keeps doing more and more, then everybody has to be a keeper-upper, and good luck to all of us.
No, although I'm glad you touched upon the keeper upper kind of like, thinking. You've mentioned in your personal blog on your website that, for you, even on your earlier days, you kind of had to adapt a lot to the environment that you were in. From like an early age, you were born like, premature, to then being the tiny kid in the class who's like, considered the boy genius, then learning how to dance, going from one field to another, and then excelling at it. And that kind of requires a personality type that adapts to the environment. And I feel like no matter where you are thrown in your life, whichever environment, you would be able to do that. And those core beliefs kind of also gives you that very positive view to how AI in the future will look like. So what do you say to the nihilists, and how would you help them change the way that they see the world?
So people who are not
saying it's all doom and gloom, I would say.
Yeah. I guess if we think of AI as the bus, if you don't want to climb onto the bus, you'll end up under it. I wish I could say something more encouraging than that, but I think that's.
I was alluding a little bit more towards, I know this is veering slightly away from AI, and I am completely okay if you do not want to indulge, is when you're talking about the three languages of politics and how we are speaking different languages and what happens because of that, and connect that a little bit with the way that we see AI and just in general. If you would like to indulge, completely
Okay,
respect it.
so the quick review is that there are we can think of three bad things. We can think of barbarism, we can think of oppression, and we can think of coercion. You get, government telling you at gunpoint what to do. And the three languages are different people emphasizing each of those bad things. So a progressive will emphasize oppression as the bad thing, and accuse the people who disagree with progressives as being on the side of the oppressors. And a conservative will say that barbarism is the bad thing, that we're the only ones who care about the good things of traditional civilization. And a libertarian will say coercion is the bad thing, and other people just want to strengthen the power of the state. So that's how you get to three languages, three people talking past each other, using those languages to demonize each other. I think, excuse me, I really got a cough here.
No worries.
It's from allergies. I think the AI is kind of tweaking that a bit. So you have some conservatives who will make the case that AI is on the side of barbarism, that we're losing our ability to read and write and think critically. And there are some progressives who think it's on the side of oppression, that the big companies are going to manipulate us and have power over us. So, um, so it doesn't divide along those lines. I think because AI seems to threaten people in higher education right now, they feel that the sort of opposition to AI is becoming sort of left-coded, and support for AI by default is becoming somewhat right-coded, even though there are plenty of people on the right who are against it. So I've described when we were in Austin, we would go to a concert, and Austin is a very left-wing place. Texas as a whole is not, but Austin is left-wing. And at a concert, if the musician criticized Trump, they got a lot of applause. If they criticized ICE, the people who are deporting illegal immigrants, then they got a lot of applause from the left-wing audience. And when the musician denounced AI, they got wild applause, whooping, and tremendous support. So there's, I think, a lot of opposition building to it right now. It shows up in the attempt to stop data centers, and so that's an interesting phenomenon. But I don't think it maps too well to my three languages of politics story.
Because it has become politicized. I feel like it's not specifically the three languages of oppressor versus, like, oppressor, oppressed, civilization versus barbarism, or liberty versus coercion. I think from a perspective of now, it has become a tool. It's almost like, okay, let's use that as a talking point, because it is such a issue in terms of it will affect the economics of a people. It will affect the job market, so to speak. So now it's almost as a mechanism where you separate what it actually does versus making it into, like, how is it going to help people get votes? Straightforward.
At a fundamental level, I think a lot of politics is sort of group status kind of contests. And right now, AI is a clear threat, I think, or is clearly perceived as a threat to the group status of typical intellectuals, people with people on college campuses. And so that's where a lot of the opposition is located. And the group status that it raises is just a very small group of people who think they understand, claim they understand how the technology works. So I think that, to me, that's how the politics of it develops. And I think that the opposition is much larger than the support. But the challenge is that the people who are working on it are just working very fast, very effectively, and it's not clear how you would stop them. I mean, they'll probably work around any restrictions on data centers. It's hard to know how to regulate the technology itself. So I often quote something that Ray Kurzweil, who's a futurist, and said the singularity is near and so on. Many years ago, he said regulations are like stones in a river. They're not going to stop the river.
Of course. I think I agree, yes. But then what are, the policies makers consistently getting wrong when they try to, put the intangibles in in terms of coming to innovation? What do you think are the?
Uh, yeah, what do I think they are likely to get wrong. I think that right now people are, nobody, even on the most, technically savvy person can say they fully understand AI. So
Hmm.
people are relating it sort of metaphorically to something else. Some people think it's somehow the next phase of social media, or it's, the next phase of Google search, or it's just a big encyclopedia. And so people are going to, I think, try to regulate it based on those assumptions, but they don't know actually what it is.
Hmm.
And I don't, I'm not confident that I know what it is. I try to do things with it. I feel like I'm behind the times
Hmm.
by about 8 months in terms of using its capability,
Yeah.
which in this environment is like, light years. I don't know. So I think people are just, they're trying to guess based on some metaphor, and nobody knows really what these things are doing because they can't explain what they're doing or how they're doing it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the reason for you? Because you're one of the early adopters of the internet. You had a dot-com company. You sold it. I think it was $82 million that it was sold at, and you've had a blog at the longest time. Can you tell me a little bit about, your adoption and also being open to it and almost like a vanguard in it of like, basically taking it in and adapting?
Well, there's this odd character who's not very likable in a story called The Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
And he seems to adopt every new fad. So maybe I'm a bit like him. There are a few things that I have not adopted that other people have. So I don't think I go for everything. Something that I feel I can quickly use and quickly grasp. So the web, I was able to quickly grasp. Like I saw somebody demonstrate. I just saw some early demonstrations of it. Said, okay, I get this.
Hmm.
Blogging, I could quickly grasp. In fact, in some sense, I'm still doing that just on Substack. Things that I didn't grasp, I would say the smartphone. Now I understand it, but
Hmm.
at first I thought, who wants to look at the internet on a phone?
Hmm.
Didn't make sense to me. Crypto, I I don't. I'm the opposite of a crypto fan. I think of it as a Ponzi scheme.
But
Silly.
isn't the sorry to like go on a tangent, but like, fiat currency has also kind of been like, okay, it's another way to control people versus Bitcoin, where it's everywhere, everyone access immediate. Like this is also innovation.
So the way I describe it is fiat currency is adjacent to government. Right? So
I guess.
and uh, and Bitcoin is adjacent to crime. It's adjacent to so it does the transactions that government won't protect and support. And now a few of those I think are good, like remittances from one country to another. If you're living in one country and you want to send money home, governments make it very hard to do that. Bitcoin
Hmm.
makes it easier. That's a legitimate use case. But uh, but in general, uh, I think of government and banking as adjacent, and I think of
Hmm.
underground economy and cryptocurrencies adjacent, and I don't think they're going to merge in any way.
No, I don't think it would make sense for a government to like almost let go of that fiat currency. It is a sense of like, authority. I understand that. But I'm considering from a perspective of a globalized economy where transferring of money or like, hedging your bets on a certain kind of Bitcoin because Bitcoin's return value has been increasing over the years. Yes, there is a loads of, AI, Doge coins, or you name it, XYZ coins, there are billion in the market. It's all based on trust based systems. And the more and more people start to see how easily and quickly economies fall, what is the alternative then?
Um, well, I'm hoping that that the major economies prove trustworthy and don't completely
I would
collapse.
hope so too, of course. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen, but the reality of the situation is because I come from the Middle East. I used to live in Dubai, a very safe haven for the Middle East. And now with all the economic, like the political development, it is very, I wouldn't say like people still have trust and faith in that market, but it has changed. And I can see it's not even a year how quickly things have changed. So what guarantees does a person have if like,
Yeah,
so-called secure markets are not so secure anymore? And that's why from my perspective, again, I don't expect you to argue the case, but Bitcoin seems to be a bigger, safer bet from like a global perspective. Like if I'm in a village in India versus I'm in the US, I can still have Bitcoins have the same value, and it's more secure than I would anything else. Yes, it's not government controlled,
yeah.
but
No,
anyways.
I think of, what people use as money is the term is from a science fiction novel, a
Mhm.
consensual hallucination. So
Yes.
we all agree that it's usable. Uh, so could we all suddenly not agree that the dollar is usable? It could happen, but
Mhm.
I think
I hope not, but
it's
yes.
pretty unlikely. I think uh, I think the United States would have to basically lose a war for that to happen, uh, pretty much. That'd be the one scenario where I see that happening.
Mhm.
Whereas if people, if people decide they're not going to use Doge, that they don't believe in Dogecoin, then they can decide that, and that's
True.
so I just think that's more of a risk.
It would correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the stock market kind of the same thing? You kind of alluded to the 2008 crash or the property bubble and the whole thing. And they're all based on trust. Everything is kind of like we all seem to kind of trust, but we also don't. And that's how, everything kind of works.
Yeah,
So, what guarantees do we have in
yeah.
anything?
Well, that's interesting. Mentally, I've been working on an essay about the stock market, and I don't think it's as different from Bitcoin as I would like it to be. Uh,
Exactly.
that um, you know, in principle, there's real value there, right? It used to be that if you bought a stock, you were buying shares uh, in the plant and equipment of the company, and you could always say, well, the plant and equipment of the company have some value. If nothing else, they have scrap value. They can be sold to something else. And
Hmm.
now what you're buying is kind of your faith in Elon Musk, or uh, or if OpenAI goes public, your faith in Sam Altman, and it's a different world. I think the stock market has always had psychological component to value, but I think the psychological component has gotten bigger and bigger, and to me personally, scarier and scarier.
Hmm. But do you think almost this is the American way? Okay, and I'm new to the American way of thinking, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like break things and then find out. It's the same way that Elon Musk went into Twitter's let's just change everything. We're going to the moon and we're going to figure it out. If you see the drugs here, okay, let's make it stronger, stronger and stronger. Let's make it faster. It's just the way that the Americans think. It's like, let's break it, we'll build it from ground zero. So yes, Bitcoin is a dangerous, proposition in many uh, ways, but we are just testing the theory. And again, bringing not to bring politics so much into it, but Trump, he's gone in and broken everything down, and now we go like, okay, that doesn't work, that works, that doesn't work. So we've kind of almost like testing to find out, and we are almost like, okay, whatever the risks are, let's do it. But again, I'm wrong. Maybe I would like to get your feedback on this.
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization that a willingness to try things is definitely there. I have sort of an old-fashioned picture of the stock market again as sort of you're investing in some kind of assets, and the assets are sort of more and more, less and less tangible, more and more intangible, being valued at a much higher rate than the tangible assets used to be valued at. And it's something I don't understand, is I guess the best way.
I totally I get where your concept is. I think it's a transition phase for all our generations. I grew up at a time when my dad used to use a pager versus now everyone's got a smartphone and a Bluetooth, and we are having Google, what's it called, Meta glasses on. So I think we're still in that, the snake shedding its skin phase. We will learn as we grow. Just keep your mind open and prepare yourself for the ride, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, it's very unpredictable, and it's almost worse than that. It's like shedding its skin at a faster, sheds the skin, and instead of keeping the new skin for 2 or 3 years, it sheds it again in 6 months and sheds it again in 3 months. Very hard to keep up.
No, like they say, the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of have to adapt. I grew up in a time where COVID was a thing, and now it's AI, and then joblessness, and in the market, you just adapt. Our generation is starting to just go with the flow. We will see. It was really fun talking to you. Would also like to share with the guests your platforms where they can find you. If someone is just starting to get to know your work, where would you recommend them they start?
Two possible places. One is my Substack. Just Google Arnold Kling Substack, you'll find it. Or if they want to get sort of more history the way you have, they could go to my website. I have again, arnoldkling.com website.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.